Hey guys, I am going to explain how we can divide text up into multiple columns using CSS. It's actually really super easy. Looks like it would be complicated, but it's actually really simple. So this is the creating text columns tutorial. So I'm going to have you guys click on this. It will bring you here. And once you scroll down, you can see all the different properties that we can use here for creating multiple columns in CSS. So I'm going to quickly, discuss what those are. Um, the first thing, the column count property, is just basically telling the web page how many columns do we want for a particular element. So let's look at this here for the div element. So this is a div element right here, and this is divided up into three different columns. So if you see here, we used the column count, and there happens to be a class applied here. That's how we know is the dot newspaper. We're dividing this into three columns. So all we did here is use the column count. Now we can get a little bit more specific here with column count by specifying the specific gap between each of the columns. So we use the column gap property. In this particular example, we're adding a gap between each of the columns of 40 pixels. And notice here, this is 40 pixels. It's 40 pixels between the two closest characters. So this is 40 and this is 40. So it's adding 40 pixels between the columns. So that's column gap. Then we also have column rules. Now, rules in this situation doesn't mean the same thing as like rules that how we typically refer to rules in CSS. I know, couldn't make that any more confusing, right? But rules in this situation are the lines that are placed between each of the columns, making it, easier to read. And in this case, we're using the value solid, but it's kind of like we have, options here like borders. So we can, try different types here. Let's just say double, and we get a double line. So basically the same values we would have for borders, we could also use for the column rule style. Okay, going through these here, we can also specify the width of the column rule. In this case, it is 1 pixel. I think if we don't specify it, I think it defaults to 2 pixels, just like borders, kind of the same situation as borders, but we can change that with the column rule width. And we can also change the color with the property column rule color. And in this case, we're getting a light blue rule or a light blue line in between each of the columns. So with many of our properties, as we've been doing in CSS, we're listing them all out separately here. But remember, we can use the shorthand property in this example here. If we just use the column rule property and then just combine everything. So we can combine it into 1 pixel width, solid type, and of course the color would come last. Kind of like we do with borders or, all the other thing, padding, any other thing we would use the shorthand property for. So I hope this was helpful in understanding the column width property. You can go through, some of these other tutorials here. This is basically just explains the column span. So, just basically how many columns should a particular element span across. So in this particular case, it's basically saying that this H2 element right here should span across all three of these columns if it was long enough to do so, but it's actually only long enough to span across most of this first or all of this first column, and then just a very small portion of this second column. And finally, the column width. Just like we can specify the width of any of our sections in the web page, such as the body, the section, the aside, anything like that, we can specify the width of the column as well. So check out all those tutorials. There's no exercises for text columns, but definitely play around with it in those tutorials. And also it will be on your test. So good luck, guys.